Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KON Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. We have online with us Dr. John Zmirak. He's been on this program a number of times before. He's a contributing editor at The Stream, senior editor, that is. Received his BA from Yale University, his MFA in screenwriting and fiction, and his PhD in English from Louisiana State University. He's also acted as a press secretary for Pro-Life Governor, is very much active on the blogging, and of course also in writing for a number of different outlets. So you've written a couple of articles, one of which caught my eye on atheism. We're going to hit that first, but there's also another article for those that are out there that want to get a heads up on what we're going to talk about second segment, and that's on a number of novels that have been written over the last century that pretty much predicted as to where we're at today. But first, let's talk about this article. I guess this was a two-part series that you wrote with Jason Jones. Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. It's called A User's Guide to Godless Liberalism. And what we were trying to do was explain how it is that modern secular liberals believe such a long string of seemingly contradictory things. Like, why do they believe, on the one hand, that every religious group deserves respect, but on the other hand, that Christians deserve extreme scrutiny and probably discrimination? Why are so many of them concerned about animal rights, and they're even vegetarians, but they're fine with abortion, even partial birth abortion? And we really were puzzling about this. Actually, it was Jason's idea. He pointed out that the same liberals who were saying that there's no way that, female refugees from Syria could be a threat to anyone, widows and orphans, the same people want to let women into the U.S. Marine Corps. Well, which is it? Are women a threat or not? And so we tried to figure out how it is that seemingly sane and often educated people end up with outrageously self-contradictory worldviews that don't seem to bother them at all.
Right. You've got a list of all of these contradictions on your article. We'll try to get that up at restoringliberty.com. Those type of hypocritical stances, especially when it comes to Islam versus Christianity, I think have troubled a number of thinkers on the conservative side. Some just write it off as, hey, it's a liberalism, it's a mental disorder, or something, flippant like that. Give us kind of the core of it. What's going on?
So I'm talking about people who might have started off with the Christian belief system, having grown up that way or having accepted it, and then they come to a crisis. Something happens in their life that they just can't believe that a loving God would permit that to happen. It could be anything. It could be somebody dying. Could be a member of their family coming out as gay. Something happens that shakes their belief in God. Well, they instead of staying with that and trying to cling to the faith, they leave. And what does that do? Well, first of all, it creates a kind of a moral void, which is kind of a relief. Instead of their every action potentially affecting their eternal destiny, all of a sudden, things don't matter nearly as much. And that can be a huge relief, I think, at first for people. But then they start to feel a sense of emptiness. They want something to matter. They want to think that they're good people who other people will like. They want to have a sense of purpose in their lives. But having rejected God, what do they go for? Well, I think what they do is they look at suffering. Now, for Christians, suffering is a bad thing, but it's something that can be turned to good. It's usually a side effect of sin on someone's part. And if we embrace suffering the right way and sort of carry the cross, we can turn it into something good. It can be redemptive. Well, for secular liberals, suffering is just plain terrible. In fact, it is the worst thing in the universe. Since there is no sin, suffering is the worst thing in the universe. So that what they do is they decide, well, then I want to fight suffering. Let's have a war on suffering. And, that doesn't sound so bad, except that their definition of suffering is wrong. Their definition of happiness is wrong. Because they don't have an eternal compass, their notion of happiness is pretty much degraded to happy moments, pleasant, easygoing, relaxing experiences for everyone. And you get a kind of a utilitarian calculus. The goal of society is the greatest number of hallmark moments or Kodak moments for the greatest number of people. But what stands in the way of that? Well, one of the main things that stands in the way of everybody being relaxed and easygoing and not really caring too much about things is religion, especially Christianity, because Christianity tells you that certain things are simply forbidden. Certain things are simply against the nature of things. They're against the way God made us. They violate the author's intent. If God's our author and we're his artworks, well, we're violating his intent if we do things certain ways. And both the Bible, but also reason and history tell us what some of those things are. So suddenly Christianity becomes, in their minds, this enormous obstacle to people's self-fulfillment. Also, a lot of these people used to be religious. They might still have some leftover guilt feelings, some leftover shame about that. So they kind of have a chip on their shoulder. They're prejudiced. They want to see Christianity in the darkest possible light.
That really explains hostility toward Christianity. But does it fully explain the other contradictions that you guys have pointed out? I mean, because not all of these things...
I think it does. Look at Islam. Why is it that the same people can look at Christians and see them as a great threat to tolerance and then overlook the enormous intolerance of Islam? The regular beheadings, the killing of women, the honor killings, the executions of homosexuals. It's because they are primed to find Christianity as a threat to tolerance, and they think of Islam as something that minorities do, and we shouldn't look at it too closely because we're in danger of becoming bigots. So they're purposely looking for the selective filter for negative things about Christianity and the culture that's associated with it, especially Western culture and in America, the middle class.
And many of these folks are considered to be the thinking men and women in academia. I mean, they really hold to these views so solidly that it's very difficult to show them, even through civil discourse, the internal contradictions of their positions. Have you ever, I'm sure you from time to time engage with some of these folk, trying to get them to see the hypocrisy of position. Tell us a little bit about the type of responses you get.
Well, the responses I get are always deflected because I find most of these people don't hold their positions because they followed a logical chain of argument. They hold them because of some emotional experience they had way back that put them off the course of Christianity, and now they've joined a new group. They've joined the progressive tribe. And they've checked off all the boxes required to be good members of the right-thinking, respectable, humanitarian, progressive tribe. And when you argue with someone for using reason, it's sort of pointless if the reason he accepted these views had nothing to do with rational argument. It had to do with, this is what you have to do to be part of our club. In this case, the club of enlightened, progressive liberals.
So how do you reach these folks? I mean, have you ever had success at reaching somebody really vested in that position?
I've planted seeds and later on heard years later that something I said kind of shook the foundations of what they held to. And they would send me an email or look me up years later and thank me for one thing in particular that I said. But I don't think you can ever expect instantaneous results. I think sometimes traumatic events can change people. I think 9/11 woke a lot of people up. I think some of these recent terrorist tragedies are waking some people up. And I think that the Muslim terrorists are really doing themselves and their evil cause a disservice, blowing up American cities in the run-up to the 2016 election because they're not going to get the president that they would prefer.
It's interesting when you look at the other side, I guess as I'll put it, argue their positions. So very often they're known as being kind of those that are advocating for the victims, and the prisoners, those that are kind of ostracized by society, and yet at the same time they advocate for positions that harm the most innocent of victims in our society. Whether it be abortion, whether it be through some sort of obscene sex acts that they're trying to assert, or allowing grown men dressed as women to go into little girls' bathrooms and do whatever. I mean, those are the type of things that you would think would register a little bit, but they're so grounded in their positions, they can't see it, can they?
No, I mean, look at the Syrian refugee question. you've got all these young military-aged men marching their way into Europe and wanting to come to America. They don't seem to have been in any obvious danger. The liberals fall all over themselves embracing these people. The real persecuted people, the real refugees, are the Christians in Syria and Iraq, who we don't even see on television because they're afraid to go to the refugee camps where the Muslim men kill them, rape them, and beat them. So the real victims are people huddling in containers outside of Mosul in Iraq. They're Christians who are actually hunted for their religion. Those are people who are actual helpless victims. Liberals don't want to give them any preference. They want to latch on to the chic, exciting cause of the day, which is proving how tolerant you are of other cultures. And letting Christians in doesn't really quite prove that. Letting Muslims in, that really proves it.
I appreciate you and Jason Scott Jones presenting this. I mean, in good form. It's easy to read. The 2-article series, we'll get that up at joemiller.us. Next, we're going to talk after this break about the 5 novels, conservative novels, that predicted the mess that we're in now, including one written in 73, 63, 32, 53, and even 1908. Stay with us. Dr. John Zmirak. Going to be right back after these messages.